Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ryan Budd. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Events with LifeSciences BC. So thrilled to have everybody here this morning for our second and a third three-part series, Succeeding in the Virtual World. And today we are doing a Preparing the Perfect Pitch Deck. And we have a great lineup of speakers for you today. And this event is presented in partnership with Biosciences Manitoba and Alberta, along with us at LifeSciences BC. So just some housekeeping before we begin. We strongly encourage everybody to participate in the chat. So if you've got comments, I may post a few questions there. Please put your responses in there. You can see where the participants are if you'd like to see some other people who are attending this event, and then you can send them a private little note to let them know, say hello, or we should catch up. In the Q&A, please put all of your questions there. There is a little upvote button, so if you see questions that other people have asked that you would also like to have asked, please put them in the Q&A section there. During any of the presentations, if you would like to see them a little bit larger, please put your cursor over on the top right. You'll see 4 little arrows. You click on that, and that presentation then goes to full screen. We are going to have some networking afterwards, so we'll probably have about 3 rounds at about 8 minutes each. And I would just ask everybody, please fill up the first 5 tables first, so we have nice full tables, and then you can expand from there. All of our speakers, which today is going to be Marshall and Matt, will have their own table that is marked. So if you would like to go and visit with them and meet them, please go to the first 3 tables. And then once you've had 1 round with them, please move to a different table. To move to a separate table, you just double click on the table that you would like to move into. And if you're not there with the speakers, you can just do an introduction for 1 minute, let everybody know who you are, your title, what you thought of today's event. So that's just a great way to socialize. We would please ask that you wait for the break in order to move. So what you will see is you actually will see there will be an announcement to move to another table. Please wait until that is done so you're not popping in and out of tables, which can be a little distracting for the other people there. Very important, when we go back to the floor, please make sure that you turn your camera on and turn your mic on. If you don't, people can't see you there. So that's a really important note. So again, please make sure as soon as we're back to the floor, you turn your camera on and your mic on as well. You will also see that we have areas there for LifeSciences BC, Biosciences Association Manitoba, and Alberta. So you can go there and meet if you're interested in becoming a member, a sponsor. We will have colleagues there from all those organizations. And last reminder, if you would like to upload your picture, it's much easier for everybody to see you in your profile as well as your social media links so you can connect afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage our President and CEO, Wendy Hurlbert, who is going to be your moderator for the day. And I will now turn it over to Wendy. So over to you, Wendy.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Wendy Hurlbert, and I am the President and CEO of LifeSciences British Columbia. On behalf of LSBC, Alberta, and Biosciences Association Manitoba, we welcome you to the second of our 3-part series of webinars focused on succeeding in the virtual world. We're excited to be bringing together life sciences leaders from across Western Canada, and I know from looking at the participant list, we have also people from Ontario and Quebec, so happy to have you all join us today. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining this event from within the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Many of our speakers are joining us from other traditional and unceded Indigenous territories from across this beautiful province and country. Welcome, everyone. As we mentioned, this is the second of a 3-part series, bringing together life sciences SMEs from across Western Canada to connect, learn, and work and network. We would like to acknowledge the Western Canada Partnership is gratefully supported by WD, whose support has made this possible. Today's topic is titled Preparing the Perfect Pitch Deck. We have a great selection of speakers who will share their wealth of experience and advice. So on to the program. Our first speaker is Marshall Ring. Marshall has been involved in company formation and commercializing early stage technologies since the late 90s. He's committed to providing executive mentoring and building a strong network for startup visa members. He has a great reach into many national markets, service providers, and investors. Marshall holds a master's degree in natural resource management, specializing in community economic development. He also holds an undergraduate honors degree in cultural anthropology. Welcome, Marshall.
Thank you. I'm just getting the camera on. There we go.
There you are.
Sorry, technical glitch already. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Wendy. So shall I jump straight into the presentation?
Yes, please, and you can share your slides. And just if you have full presentation. There you go. Perfect. Thanks.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts. I'll make sure that I'm within sort of the 6 to 8 minute time frame, and nothing like setting up for a difficult task of communicating how to prepare the perfect pitch deck, not one that is good enough. But regardless, I shall aspire to live up to the ambitious title. My name is Marshall Ring, and I'm the CEO of the Manitoba Technology Accelerator. We deal with early stage technologies and we turn them into businesses. I also co-founded and manage an angel group here in Manitoba, and I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts. So just maybe some context here. Raising capital is an art, not a science. There is no right or wrong way. Therefore, the idea of a perfect deck is not, maybe always possible, but instead, it is a deck that resonates with your audience. And the focus of this presentation is I've taken the approach that you have somebody interested and they've said, okay, pass me a deck. So how do we go forward from this stage? Couple of key points that I'd like to reinforce is that nobody really wants to hear you talk for an hour. The purpose of decks, in my opinion, is to capture someone's imagination in the audience and have it with a well-defined opportunity. So while it is art, not science, the same way if there's a dance, if people have the same steps and expectations, then there is a better movement to it. So there is a structure that we like to see. And from my perspective, success from giving a deck is to have the audience say, this sounds interesting. Can you provide me more information? So recognize it's a step in the process that leads you to your ultimate goal of trying to raise some equity capital. So for today, what I thought I would do is just give an example of a deck and the layout and the content that I typically like. I'm not going to go too terribly deep into each of the slides, but rather going to present more of an executive summary level as we drive forward here. So start out very simply with a company name, tagline, date, and usually where you're from. And then I like to throw it a one-liner to capture somebody's interest. So what I've done is I've prepared a mock deck here, some fully completed and some sort of open-ended points. But just for example, this was one of the companies we were working with, and so we can just see digital data applied into ag is a powerful tool driving sustainability, feeding the world, and delivering profits to farmers and technology companies which have meaningful value propositions. So really, I just want to frame up into someone's mind what we are going to be talking about. I do also like to jump straight into the ask. So this also helps people set context in their minds. So what are you asking for if you're preparing a deck looking for capital? And what is the valuation and what does somebody get? And I then like to talk always about the current problem or opportunity. So there's currently a gap that your technology or your innovation is about to solve, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands the status quo. So what I've done here is we've taken satellite imaging, and we have figured out a better way to do satellite imaging. And currently, the problem reduces optimum yields by 7%. Okay, so we understand we're into the precision ag space. We understand that there's a technical problem, and the company is looking for money. So here's what we've come up with. We've got a solution that explains what we've developed and solves the pain. So therefore, just jumping to the bottom, we can solve that 7% problem and increase yield. Now, that's a powerful statement. I then like to move into why can you do it? What's your innovation? What's your magic? And a lot of times here, diagrams are better than words. So we would come up with this technical solution that we've come up that describes why we can mitigate the problems of darkness and obstructed views for farmers. Then into the business model. So I don't know if anybody reads Guy Kawasaki. Art of the Start is a great book. So who has your money in their pocket and why will they give it to you? So I dislike general market trends. I do like knowing specifically customer acquisition platforms. So ag producers, farmers will buy annual subscriptions from us priced at per section modularity. So I now know how I can do a total addressable market by going bottoms up. Okay, so if those are my customers, how am I going to get to them? So usually we like to get beta customers to support our minimum viable product offerings. So for example, we partnered with a large scale producer in Western Canada who was our first beta customer, and we showed a 4% improvement in yield. Now we're going to get the white papers, and then we're going to leverage sales and distribution channels, and we just talk about where we're going to enter the market and with some some meaningful goals for entering that market. So now that we've framed up what the problem is, we've framed up what our solution is, we've framed up who our customers are and how we're going to make money, we want to just sort of throw in a competitive analysis. So status quo is always a great competitive analysis to throw in, and other competitive technologies. This is a pretty simple map, but it does actually help provide scope and context. Now, importantly, who is going to be doing the work? So we want to know who's on the management team and what their professional backgrounds and experiences are. Is this a team that we can bet on? So now we're thinking, okay, we've got this generally under control. We know this the problem. We've got the technology solution. We've got some beta customers, and we've got a management team that's ready to scale. We know how much money, because on the second slide we said, what's the ask? Now we want to know, how are you going to spend that money? So be specific with your planned use of funds. Let the investors know in the deck what the money is going to go towards. Then follow up with some financial projections and key metrics, recognizing these are going to be best guesses, but they should still be within some sort of reason. And then follow up with questions and enable questions throughout the presentation. Remember, when you're doing a pitch deck, and virtual or in person, you really want to engage with your audience and have them come along with the story. You don't want to talk at them. And with this, that concludes my slideshow. And notably, I'm right at 7 minutes, which is in between the 6 and the 8. So pleased to say that I respected the time frames and am looking forward to other presentations.
Thank you very much, Marshall. And that is yet another thing about preparing the perfect pitch deck, is being in the allotted time. So you get a gold star and have set a high bar. I want to everyone to put questions in the Q&A, because we'll have a Q&A at the end of our speakers. And now I have the opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Ann Woods. Ann is the Managing Director of Life Science and Healthcare Practice for Silicon Valley Bank in Toronto, where she's responsible for leading the bank's efforts in this sector across Canada. Ann has close to 25 years experience in capital markets and life sciences. She began her career as a financial analyst, and in 2005 went back to her roots in life sciences. Prior to joining SVB, Ann spent several years as a director with the Pangea Group, bringing insights and strategic direction to life science and healthcare clients. In 2018, Ann joined the board of Life Sciences Ontario. She holds a BSc from McGill University and an MA from the University of Guelph, and is also a CFA charter holder. Anne is a passionate life sciences leader and very kindly and generously gives a lot of time to the ecosystem across the country. And we're thrilled to have her with us today. Anne, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. Are my slides working here?
Your slides are there.
Perfect. Okay. So I first off want to start off by saying thank you, because I really do enjoy doing these presentations. And I'm also thrilled that despite the fact that Marshall and Matt and I did not have a chance to compare notes or share decks prior to this, so far we are 100% aligned in some of the advice we're giving. So phew to that, because I didn't want us to be giving any contradictory advice. The one thing that I did just really love, Marshall, about your presentation was that closing slide of asking questions. I didn't actually, I've never seen that before when someone's presented a deck on pitch deck. So I think that's really, really fantastic. So sort of, building off of what Marshall said, really what I'm going to sort of hone in a little bit on is, how to build the perfect life science pitch deck, because, there are nuances about life science presentations that I think are different than the typical advice you might get for a more tech focused pitch. And so it really is this balancing act between, telling a story and sharing your data. And the reason why it is such a tricky balancing act, because the truth is with life science companies, you're looking at, more time, more patient investors, and more money. So it's really important that you get that balance right. And so, what I like to talk about is, your opening slides should really provide a hook to really get investors listening to you. So, if you, have a clear an easy way to tell your story about why the status quo isn't working, that's going to be critical to get engagement. And so this means that you need to take the time to understand, whether it's the patient experience or the caregiver experience or, current gaps in the healthcare system. That's going to be a really important piece of getting investors interested. And so once you've really laid that foundation and established that unmet need, that's the time to then dive into the science. But it's important to remember that while life science investors are very technically savvy and often have master's and PhD levels degrees, they probably aren't as technically sound as you are in your own technology. So, it's important to remember that. And I think, again, to, agree with what Marshall said, this is a really great place to use visuals. So you can then tailor your presentation based on your audience, and you can go as deep into the science as you want. But if you've got the visuals, that's going to help provide an explanation to a novice. And so, at this point, it's you can throw a bunch of slides with heavy clinical data into the appendix. So if somebody wants more information, it's there for you to provide it. But in the deck, you really want to kind of keep the science, geared towards a novice. And then, of course, another important thing really is, okay, so there is an unmet need, and we've got the science that's better than the current status quo. But how big is the market? Is anybody actually going to pay for it? So this is the time where you need to really do your work. So you need to figure out what the real true size of the market is. What's the path to commercialization? So has somebody come before you and tried to do the same thing? And has the investor you're talking to ever been burned in the same area before? So make sure you do your research. And one area that comes up very often with biotech companies is, this is the moment where you want to choose that lead indication. And you want to make sure that that's the one that makes the most sense. So it could be the one with the lowest barrier to entry. So if you have an indication in a rare or orphan disease, for example, that's going to shrink that clinical and real regulatory timeline, because you're going to be able to, accelerate through some of the processes to get your drug to market. So something to consider. And investors are savvy. They've seen lots of slides about how big the total market is. So, make sure you do your homework to get that right and don't exaggerate. So given that we need more time and money to get to commercialization, investors are really going to want to see that you've got a clear understanding of exactly how much time and money. So you can use a table like this to really lay things out. So you can use that to show the clinical and financial and commercial sort of pathways. What have you already completed? So how is this technology already de-risked for the investors? How much funding do you require to get to that next milestone, that next value inflection point? And then what's the total funding required? So if you think about an investor coming in at Series A, they want to know how much money they need to set aside for Series B and C if they want to stay engaged as a strategic partner with your company. And so being able to have a well-designed milestone and pipeline slide shows that you understand not just the science, but also the clinical and regulatory pathways. And so this again builds on one of Marshall's slides. So, but I would say in the case of LifeSciences, it's important not just to provide information about the management team or the founder experience. So that's really important, but to know that you're surrounding yourselves by really good scientific and clinical advisors. So people that understand the science, but also that people that understand the sort of practical nature of how your device or your drug is going to be used in a real world environment. So, someone that understands how decisions making is done, whether it's at the government level or at hospitals, that's going to be really critical. And then if you think about business advisors, I work with a group of former CEOs of Canadian headquarters of global pharma companies. And, these are people that really understand this sort of, nitty gritty and the politics. And these people could provide, great business insights to companies that are, much earlier down the pathway, but need a vision for where they're headed. And then I think the last piece, and, is get involved with associations. So whether it's LifeSciences BC or patient groups or groups of KOLs that can really provide support to you, whether it's in finding vendors or it's in getting KOL support as you get farther down the pathway. So it's really important that you have this real fulsome group of advisors around you. And then I touched a little bit on what to include in the appendix. So, you want to tailor your presentation to your audience. Some are going to be more technical, some are not. So, anything that's sort of, heavy data that involves heavy explanation, deep clinical information, maybe some of the, assumptions and forecasts that you've put into that milestone slide could be included here. And then if you've got any information around press and publications, you can provide links in the appendix. And finally, I think, things to avoid. So, be careful not to be too heavy on the data and don't tell a story at all. You want to create an emotional connection, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you've got the data to back up that emotional connection. So avoid too many slides, 10 max. You can use the appendix to vary more. Try not to have too much information, visuals where possible that you can explain them. And, there's, I think, different schools of thoughts about, exits and valuations and whether that should be in the pitch deck. So I think maybe Marshall and I do disagree on this one point. I say leave the valuation out. I think it could create unnecessary confusion. But you know what? Maybe you should have it at, ready to talk about just in case somebody does want to talk about it. And so with that, I think I've taken more than my 8 minutes. I'll hand the floor back to Wendy.
Thanks, Anne. According to my clock, you were right on time.
Oh, perfect.
So there you go. Thank you. A reminder, everybody, to put questions in the Q&A because we're going to have a short Q&A before the networking. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. Matt Hodgson is a co-founder and CEO of Outbreaker Solutions, an Edmonton biotech startup developing a patented fast-acting antimicrobial surface made from compressed sodium chloride. Matt completed both his Bachelor of Commerce and MBA from the University of Alberta School of Business. Along with co-founding Outbreaker, Matt has experience in business development, sales, marketing, and distribution. Additionally, Matt has 2 years of business valuation and M&A experience. Matt, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Wendy. So I definitely want to echo a lot of what our other panelists said today, but I do want to take a slightly different spin and talk more about how to deliver this pitch that you've created and kind of perfect it. So some of the stuff I'll talk about today, looking good, but more importantly, sounding great when you're on these platforms and presenting digitally. Touch on, knowing your audience and tailoring your presentation to who might be there. I want to talk about explaining biotech research and communicating that to a broader audience. And then lastly, just some tips on trying to be more conversational so you can be more engaging and hopefully drive more interest in you and your companies. So I'm sure most of you have seen, all the tips about how to set yourself up when you're on camera through your computer like this, right? You want to be fairly eye level. You want good lighting. You can get all that sorted out, but when you're presenting, really try to focus on talking to the camera, because this is a way you're going to establish, a better connection with those on the other side, because we can't really be in the same room together. So don't get caught staring in weird spots. If you have two screens, you're kind of looking off to the side, it can be a bit distracting. And then maybe you're like me, that narcissistic part of your brain that just wants to stare at yourself when you're on these platforms. So, a couple tips for that. Try to, if possible, have your image kind of hidden so you aren't just drawn to that. Or on things like Zoom, where you can have presenters up along the top. Hey, if you put yourself right below the camera, even if you get caught kind of staring at yourself, it looks like you're looking right down the lens and talking with those in the audience. But the best tip I can provide is have a good external mic of some kind to provide really good, strong, consistent sound. It can be a headset with a microphone. Even headphones have good sound quality. Laptops can be inconsistent. They can break up. If you kind of are moving or turning, they can cut out, and that's distracting. I myself have just this little external USB mic setup. It works really well. They're affordable. They're ubiquitous. It's going to give you that extra edge when you're presenting. So virtual opportunities are very abundant right now, right? Like that's a benefit, at least, if we can call it a benefit of the pandemic, is we can attend and participate in these events at a much quicker pace than before. So I would say, as a piece of advice, try to take advantage of pitch and presentation opportunities that don't just come from the traditional investor side. In our experience, some of the best collaboration opportunities and other interests have come from non-investment focused events. And participating in those actually gives you good practice for kind of perfecting your pitch and developing kind of your talking points and what you want to work in. But if you're participating in those, make sure you're tailoring your deck a little bit in your presentation and changing it up, right? If you're participating in an event that's focused on a technology or a particular problem, if it's, focused on healthcare of some kind, you don't need to necessarily get into too many details about, your financial history, your projections, deep into your team. Make sure it's engaging to those in the audience and what they've tuned in to see, right? Because at the end of the day, person kind of sitting in the chair watching, they're going to be asking some form of question in the back of their mind. How is this relevant to me, right? So you want to draw a connection. Oh, wow, this is really relevant in my industry. This could affect my business. This could affect my family. Always try to ask yourself that question. This is something, Anne talked about a bit, so I really want to echo what she talked about for, explaining your research. And this is a tough thing we have in the biotech life sciences space, because we're excited about our research. We do a lot of cool research, and that's really the basis of what our technologies and businesses are built around. But you do want to use as plain and simple language as possible, because it's more important, especially in a presentation, to appeal to a wider audience. As Anne said, again, details can be shared later, whether it's in the appendix, during the Q&A. We have our academic publications, we have research summaries that can be shared after the fact if somebody's really interested in going through those details. You don't need to kind of kill 3 or 4 minutes getting into the methodology of a certain research project when it really doesn't help advance, the overall part of what you're doing for your business. And then, we're all usually new companies, right? We have a new technology. So by definition, it hasn't been done before. So sometimes, relating what you're doing back to a current problem can be a little bit difficult. If you're able to work in a good analogy, that can be pretty powerful. In our case, we draw back to other technologies in the space or even a competitor, but you can also go kind of outside of your sector a little bit if that's going to help. For example, we're going to be, the Shopify of this, and that can really drive home, a mix of your business model, but also how big the opportunity is. And then lastly, on this point, if you can make your research visual, really try to integrate that into a presentation. This is easier said than done because, typically we have charts and graphs and numbers. But if you're able to generate an image that really hits home a key point, that can be really powerful and helpful. So for example, our company is developing a surface that kills microorganisms. So we actually generated an image with the explicit goal of having a visual piece to include in presentations. And just, you can talk about both your research and the opportunity and how good your product works. But even on first glance, it's easy to see, okay, one of these things is not like the other. So then you can explain that, and it can have, a vivid image that somebody can take away and has a better chance of ultimately remembering. Now, virtual opportunities, they're certainly abundant, but that also means the competition is that much higher. You kind of need to stand out. We all have about 87 different things competing for our attention, like quite literally, to our right or our left, we have things kind of competing for our attention. So everyone at home's in that same boat. So you want to kind of cut through some of that, especially if you're presenting and, you're in a pitch event, you're speaker 8 of 10, 12 of 15. How are you going to draw somebody's attention maybe away from an email that's caught their eye and back to you giving the presentation? Well, first off, try to be conversational. And this just takes practice, right? Like, how would you present if you were talking to, a friend or a colleague? Just really keep that really simple language, right? And build some enthusiasm into your actual presentation, right? I like to use hand gestures, right? You raise and lower your voice. Be more human and try not to be too robotic and monotonous in your tone, because again, if somebody's watching and 12 presentations have kind of been very monotoned, you're not really going to stand out too much. If you need help trying to identify exactly where that comes from, well, there's got to be a spark somewhere. You have interest in your company. Something must drive you and make you excited. State that outright in your presentation. Hey, this is what makes me really excited. And then lastly, inject a bit of your personality. If you can use humor, that's a great way to cut through some tension and stress we all kind of feel in our lives attending these events. I'll leave you this one last example. A fellow co-founder at a conference a couple of years ago began the presentation like this. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a murderer of bacteria. Doesn't need to be a good joke, can be cheesy, but guess what? You've got the attention of people. They're going to listen to you for the next 3, 5, or 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. That was excellent, and I think you actually demonstrated a lot of what you were saying, which of course makes it an even better pitch. So with that, we're going to have the Q&A. So I'd like to ask Anne and Marshall to join as well. And you three did an amazing job on building off each other's themes and sort of capturing the whole picture of pitch decks. And a question that I have, and then I'll move to the ones in the Q&A. One of them is around, and you all touched on it, that your audiences are often very different. And I think in the virtual world, that even gets more exacerbated, because sometimes you think you're going to be meeting with 1 or 2 people, and the next thing you know, there's 15, and you're trying to prepare a pitch deck that can be used both at a conference and in a more, smaller environment. So do you have any advice for people, and maybe Anne, I'll turn to you first, for how people adjust their pitch when it's a broader VC group or conference versus a more targeted audience?
Yeah, the first thing I would do is talk to people who've either presented to that audience or presented at that conference before, and learn from their experience. So I think there's 2 things that could do to help. One, it's going to, they're going to give you insights experience. So that will help you tailor the deck. So you shouldn't have a 10-slide deck. You should have a 30-slide deck that you can then pick and choose the 10 slides that you're going to present. I think the other thing is, if you do talk to somebody, especially if you're thinking about a group of investors that hasn't presented to those investors before, that provides that sort of warm connection. So if you want to pepper some personal stories, or you find out that someone plays volleyball or that they ski, you can throw those into the presentation as well.
Right. Matt or Marshall, did you want to add to that?
I guess good comment about context. So the approach I came through with this, and I should have mentioned it in my introduction, was my commentary was more reserved for if someone was pitching to an angel or an angel group. So I think Anne commented and with maybe more of a VC focus. So I would say, number one, understand the type of investor that is going to be in the audience, because friends and family are going to be different than angels, are going to be different than VCs, are going to be different than subjects. So understand the audience, and then and I guess just be prepared for variability, right? And you don't know who's going to join on events like this. So I think Anne's comment was, maybe have 30 decks or 30 slides in your deck, but be prepared for success. So understand your audience, be prepared for success.
Mm-hmm. Matt, did you have anything to add?
I mean, yeah, the only thing I might say quickly is, with our companies, you probably have different kind of, I'll call them spheres of relevance, right? Where, your technology might address a specific problem, but it's going to be in a sector or a market that people will better understand, right? Like just in our case, right? Like we have an antimicrobial surface, but we're helping fight the problem of infections, right? Which can be part of public health, right? So you can fit within one of those categories and kind of focus based on who you might be presenting to.
Yeah, I think the comment and your comment about have 30 slides in your library, so to speak, is a great one, so that you can pick and choose what's needed at the right time. I myself have done that in my career in various aspects, that I have this really long deck, and depending on what meeting I'm going to, I pick whichever slides I think are the most relevant. And then if I'm not clear that exactly who's going to be in the audience, that's what appendixes are for. And so, your slide deck may only be 5 slides, but you could keep those other slides that are a little bit of a security blanket in an appendix if you think you don't want to go ahead without them. There's a question about what are your thoughts on personal storytelling as part of the pitch? And I'm going to evolve that and start with you, Matt, because you ended with the comment of, I'm a murderer of bacteria. And, there's lots of debates about the hook. And do you start with the hook or do you end with the hook? And how far do you take the hook before it sounds gimmicky?
Yeah, that's certainly a fine line there. It'll take a bit of practice, but I think build it around what your personality is. So if you're, if you like to, add some humor. If you like to tell like a personal story, tell a personal story. Personally, I'm not a fan of kind of, that fictitious person you talk about, but that's, a preference. If you can just, start by relating it back to yourself, but follow your personality. If it's humor, great. If it's a funny story from the day before, fantastic.
Right. And Anne, I'm going to ask you to comment on that more from the VC perspective, because I think the audience is how the hook and personal storytelling is received is different depending if it's an angel investor, so Marshall, I'll turn to you after, or whether it's a VC group that listens to pitches all the time, and then it's like, oh my goodness, just get to the point. That's some of the feedback I hear sometimes.
Yeah. I think the hook in that case is it needs to be really like there's certain things that I want to know right up front. So I want to know like that you really understand the unmet need. That it's like, well, the status quo is perfectly fine. Like you're filling a gap that doesn't need to be filled. So I want to make sure that the unmet need is really, really obvious. I think to a certain degree, and this is maybe unique to life sciences, it isn't all about money. It should be impactful from a health perspective. And so tell me how it's going to have an impact, whether it's to the patient, the caregiver, or the health system. And I think if you have those two things, I think the last thing is someone going to pay for it? Because it isn't, there's a lot, you've got to get a patient interested, you've got to get a prescriber or a caregiver interested, you've got to get policymakers and regulators interested. So those things are part of the hook for a VC. Less so, when you're talking to angels that may have the grandmother or the, that has that personal story. I think it's the more technical aspects, and the, at the end of the day, is someone going to pay for it? I think is important. Right.
Marshall, do you have anything to add from the angel side as it relates to the hook?
Yeah, I mean, just
story.
Again, this is art, not science. To Matt's point, do what's natural to you. Not everybody's going to have the same approach because it won't work for everybody. And also, again, then know your audience and know what success looks like. And I do think building an emotional connection and getting them engaged, I like to do it on the front end. So again, my one-line tag, I like getting people into a yes mentality and an engaged mentality. So I like sort of hooking them, and it could be through humor or juggling flaming torches, whatever works for you. But try to get them engaged at the start, because then I find that people listen throughout the thing more, as opposed to hooking them at the end.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we are about to move to networking. There are a couple of questions that are still left. So I encourage those that have asked those questions to meet our speakers at their tables. I do want to ask you to close on one comment. And normally I try and end these types of events in a more like, what advice do you have to make people successful? But I actually think you've done such a good job with that through your presentations. I want to ask each one of you to give a watch out. So what are those things that would turn you off pretty quickly? So that people, you've given all this fantastic advice, but what is the one thing they shouldn't do? So anybody want to take that first? What's the situation that someone has pitched to you and you go, okay, like I'm not going to listen anymore? So, Anne?
For me, it's not knowing who your competition is.
That's great advice. Matt or Marshall, one of you is next.
Sure. I'll just say, for me, if there's no enthusiasm, why am I going to watch you for 5, 8, 10 minutes? Just be enthusiastic. You can't lack that.
Great. Marshall, you get the final word.
All right. Arrogance is a big turnoff for me, as well as being unprepared. If I'm going to give you some of my time, I want you to be prepared to, time is valuable. So arrogance and unpreparedness to me are soulmates.
That's great. Okay, so I just have a couple of final words before we go to the networking. So I want to thank all of you very much. Your insight was invaluable. I'm sure there's going to be lots of people that are wanting to come and meet with you. I also want to thank once again WD for their support of this partnership series. It has been invaluable, and it is what's making us be able to do that. I'd like to thank Ryan from LSBC, Trish from Alberta, and Raquel from BAM. It's been fantastic partnering with you in bringing together the first of Western Canada Partnership Series. So it's nice. It's nice to be able to work together, and I hope everyone takes an advantage of meeting with fellow life sciences leaders from across our provinces. At our events, we always talk about our upcoming events. So February 24th and 25th is LifeSciences BC's Access to Innovation Conference. It's shaping up to be a fantastic event with leaders speaking from British Columbia and abroad. So please join us. If you're looking for more information, it's on our website, or you can meet with one of us in our booth. Our third and final Western Canada Partnership Series is on March 2nd, so hope to see you there. And then we have our Showcase Series in Victoria on March 11th, where we will be showcasing Vancouver Island Life Sciences Innovation. So now on to the networking. So a couple of reminders that Ryan talked about at the beginning. Please turn on your camera and your mic, or the people won't know that you are there. Our speakers have assigned tables. You'll see them labeled. They're at the front of the virtual room. So if you'd like to connect with any of the speakers, please go there. Alberta, LifeSciences BC, and BAM have our lounges. So if you'd like to connect with us, We are all member-based organizations, and we are always all welcoming new members. So we'd love to talk to any of you that are interested in membership. And with that, I'm going to say enjoy your networking, and please take the opportunity to connect with each other, meet new colleagues, and learn from each other. Thanks.